All right, namaste everyone. So this is a short video on on 5 facts on Vedic astrology. Okay, so just trying to rekindle the theoretical aspect of astrology, so as to say. So just to give you a brief idea or a brief overview, let's number one, if we speak on the origins of Vedic astrology. Okay, so Vedic astrology or sidereal astrology, as it is also known as in the West, it is based on the belief that the stars and the planets, they have a very powerful influence on our lives. Okay, and you can actually verify this because because the waning and waxing of the moon is actually responsible for the tides, right? You have high tide, you have low tide, based on the waning and waxing of the moon. All right. So, according to Vedanta, this life, a human life, that is meant for spiritual growth. Okay. And this growth is actually facilitated by karma, right? And the very simple concept of karma for a layman is that every thought and action has a corresponding reaction. Okay, so you are free to choose, that is, but you are not free, or you do not have freedom from the consequence of your choice. Okay, so what the Vedas proclaim is that the a person's karma is actually directly related to the position of the planets and the stars. Okay, so the birth chart that we have, it's a snapshot of of all the karmas, the good karmas and the bad karmas that we have done in our previous life. Okay, so what happens is astrology becomes a very effective tool for understanding one's karma by analyzing the exact snapshot of the sky and the planets that are placed in the zodiac. Okay, so Vedic astrology, as we know, is known as Jyotish. It is also known, Jyotish actually translates to the science of light, and Vedic astrology, or Jyotish, is actually considered to be the eye of the Vedas. Okay, why the eye? Because it is meant to provide guidance to individuals who are lost and who feel confused on their life's journey. Okay, so it is also known as a sign of fate. Fate is not exactly a very proper word to use, but then astrology is used to understand all aspects of life, right? For example, if you want to know whether a future endeavor would be successful, like, right, like marriage, like moving into a new house, maybe moving into a new country, or maybe starting a new business. So all these things, whether whether these things would be successful or whether these things would lead to a failure, can be actually understood with the help of Vedic astrology. Okay, so in the past, when we had the monarchical system in place, then what happened is that Vedic astrology was also used to predict the outcome of battles, okay, or a particular governmental decision. Even now, astrology is used to predict election outcomes, right? So even now we have politicians who have who would employ astrologers, right? We have had kings who had who had employed the best of the best astrologers, for example Varaha Mihira, right? So these people, they are employed to to get a better insight on how to run a particular kingdom, right? Then comes the eternal debate. This is point number 2 I want to stress upon: the eternal debate between between astrology of the East, which is known as the sidereal astrology, and then the astrology of the West, which is known as tropical astrology. Okay, so the daily horoscope section that we come across in in most online magazines and in newspapers, it has nothing to do with Vedic astrology. Okay, because those daily horoscopes are always based on the sun sign, right? But Vedic astrology is based on the moon sign. Okay, so coming to the system of daily horoscope, as I said, they are based on the sun sign, right? And as a result, what will happen is that the predictions, right, of those systems, of the tropical system, they are often very vague, they are often very generalized, right? And as most of you must be aware, that the primary difference between between tropical astrology and sidereal astrology comes as to how we view the constellations. Okay, how we view the constellations. So looking up from the earth, right? Looking up from the earth, the planets and the sun, they trace a path along the sky, moving against a backdrop of constellations or a pattern of stars, also known as nakshatras. So these constellations or nakshatras, they make up the various astrological signs like Aries or Taurus or Pisces or whatever, right? So, when the sun or a particular planet moves in front of a particular pattern of stars, it is said to be in the astrological signs that those stars represent. Okay. So the elliptic path, right? The elliptic path, the wobbling path that the planets take as they pass in front of the 12 signs of astrology is known as the zodiac. Okay, so about 2000 years ago, maybe even more than that, both the tropical astrology, which is the Western astrology, and the sidereal astrology, which is the Vedic astrology, followed the planets along this elliptic path to create horoscopes and make predictions. Okay, but then as the earth spins on its axis, it actually experiences a wobble, which is known as precession. Okay, so this wobble, it actually tilts the earth, also tilting its elliptic plane, right? So scientifically speaking, a full wobble takes around 26,000 years to complete. And as a result, what happens is that the elliptic plane shifts about 1 degree every 72 years. Okay, so what happens is this elliptic plane has actually shifted enough in the last 2000 years that the position of the sun and the planets in relation to the signs no longer matches that of the old elliptic plane. And this difference between the new elliptic plane and the old elliptic plane is also known as ayanamsha. Okay, it is known as ayanamsha. Now there are different types of ayanamshas, of course, right? Many astrologers who have been masters of this subject, they have made their own ayanamsha, right? And if you want to view the position of the planets in Western astrology, in Vedic astrology, from the point of view of Western astrology, then you will be using Sayana Ayanamsha. Okay, the most common Ayanamsha that is used in Vedic astrology is known as Lahiri Chitra Paksha. Okay, Chitra is the nakshatra and Paksha means the opposite of Chitra nakshatra. Okay, so this Vedic astrology, it takes into account of the it takes the Ayanamsha into account, and therefore what will happen is that the horoscopes that are calculated based on the Chitra Paksha or the Lahiri Ayanamsha, it will be based on the updated elliptic path. Okay, so this is the main difference between Vedic astrology and Western astrology. Now, if I have to explain Ayanamsha through another analogy, for example, a person say is traveling from Delhi to Mumbai on a train. So, for example, suppose the distance between Delhi and Mumbai is around say 1,000 kilometers. Okay, now what will happen is the train will travel 1,000 kilometers, but the person who is sitting on the train, he would have traveled more. Why? Because he will be getting down at different stations to have his food, or maybe to go to the toilet, or maybe he will be moving in and around the compartments of the train. So Ayanamsha takes into account the movement of the person as a whole rather than the distance traveled by the train between Delhi and Mumbai. Okay, so I hope I'm clear with this example. Number three, the point that I would like to stress on is how we are impacted by the planets. Okay, so the Vedas say that everyone we know and everything we know is under the control of time. Time, of course, is known as Kala, right? So Allah actually is said to devour everything. It eats up everything, right? And by the influence of it, this Kala, the individuals are, they are pulled inevitably through various stages of existence, and after which they eventually die, and they are again pushed onto the new life. Okay, and the condition of that new life is determined by their accumulated karma, which again flows in from all the previous lifetimes, right? So this actually, this theory which is there in the Vedanta, which is very explicit in Vedanta, it also finds applicability in modern science, because modern science tells us, or quantum physics tells us, that time and space are interconnected. Okay, and because of this interconnectedness, it creates a fabric which is known as space-time, right? So large objects such as planets will affect this fabric of space-time, and it will influence everything around them. Just at the very beginning of this conversation, I gave an example of how the waning and waxing of the moon causes the tides on Earth, right? And then this is what David Frawley, who is a Vedic astrologer, who has written several books on Vedic astrology. Okay, so in one of the books, he says, he says that what we call the planets, I'll quote David Frawley here, and I quote, what we call the planets are no more than points of light in a vast energy network connected intricately by subtle lines of force, linking the entire solar system into a single organism. Though the planets appear like small points of light in the distance, their energy fields are present on Earth and they are responsible for many of the formations of the Earth life and of our own bodies and minds. Okay. So what will happen is that if you take an analogy of of life, which is which is just playing itself in the field of time, these planets are like the referees. Okay, they are maintaining order. For example, Saturn is known as it is responsible for for slowing down your speed, or Mars is actually meant it is responsible for accelerating your approach to life. Okay, so these are like referees in a football field who are maintaining order in this in this huge act of randomness, which we also call as life, right? And then the fourth point I would like to discuss is about destiny and free will, right? So, this is like an eternal conflict, right? What is destiny? What is free will? How much free will do we have as human beings? This is, this has been going on and it will go on. Okay. So, destiny, it refers to the various situations we encounter in life. And while free will is about how you react to those situations through your thought and action. Okay. So, we are actually creating further karma through our free will, right? And this free will again determine the future set of situations which we will be destined to face. Okay, so in other words, what is free will today creates our destiny tomorrow, right? Destiny is actually created by our free will. Okay, now according to the Vedas, there are four goals of human life, which is of course dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. So what is dharma? Dharma is actually dharma means to hold together. Okay, it is actually a moral code of conduct for one's spiritual growth, right? It is about it is about finding the purpose of your life. For example, the dharma of sugar is to be sweet. So the dharma of of a human being is to find out the highest purpose and keep working towards that purpose. Okay, then kama, of course, is the meaning of it is the Sanskrit word for desire, and it actually reflects the need for sensory and emotional happiness. Okay, so in some way or the other, we are all seeking joy, we are all seeking happiness, but then the Vedas, they warn us very explicitly that you should always pursue your desires, your joy, without harming yourself or without harming others. Okay, then artha, it is known as the goal or purpose. Okay, and in a way, or in more than one way, it is actually related to the acquisition of wealth or a sense of security, because wealth gives us security, right? And in order to fulfill various desires, in order to attain various goals, a person must have the necessary wealth to do so. Okay, and finally, moksha, it actually means liberation from the cycle of death and birth. Okay, and it actually it relates to the spiritual development of an individual, eventually till the point eventually when the individual frees himself or herself from the cycle of birth and death. Okay. So Vedic astrology, as I had discussed in the very beginning of this video, it is actually the map of our karma, right? And it allows us to precisely understand our own nature and destiny to navigate our lives, right? And why do we need to navigate our lives? Because we need to fulfill these four basic goals of life, right? However, the real use of Vedic astrology is actually in your spiritual upliftment, in your spiritual development, so that you can actually attain the final goal of moksha. Okay, whether a person would be able or capable of attaining moksha is seen by the position of Ketu in the Navamsha or D9. Okay, but at least even if you don't know how to see the divisional charts, by even if you study our horoscopes honestly and sincerely, we can actually comprehend what energies are affecting us and how we can respond to those energies. Okay, response can come in various ways. You can respond by going to a temple, you can respond by chanting, you can respond by by worshiping the divine for various rituals and so on, right? And all these responses, okay, all these responses to these energies, they can actually assist us tremendously in our spiritual growth. Right now, the last point I want to discuss is the qualifications of a Vedic astrologer. Okay, so generally speaking, Vedic astrology requires several years of academic study and training. But then everyone can wrote a, everyone can memorize a book by heart, that is. But then, in order to, in order to be a successful Vedic astrologer, you also need the, you also need the ability of tark. Tark means to give logic, right? Tark, you must have the ability to do tark. Okay, so as a result, what will happen is, because this is a huge, it's a huge ocean, what will happen is complete mastery of this subject is almost impossible. Okay, but beyond all these technicalities of the planets and the signs and the horoscope, what happens is Vedic astrology is actually a spiritual science. Okay, and because it's a spiritual science, it will require an astrologer some amount of intuition, you know to it will require some amount of intuition for an astrologer to maintain, to maintain this art. Okay, because if you do not have intuition, you cannot predict using a, using a horoscope. Okay, and the point is that even while giving out predictions, the astrologer must be living a life of spiritual discipline. Okay, the astrologer should not, the astrologer should not be indulgent in the carnal desires of life, right? He or she must have a strict spiritual discipline so that they can purify themselves before, before every reading or after meeting a client, right? And then if you look back at, if you turn the clock and look back at ancient India, astrologers, they were supposed to be great sages, right? Like Varahamihira. Okay, they were honest, humble, magnanimous, detached, and treated all equally. Okay, and the main purpose of those sages was to guide, to guide humanity on the path of spirituality. Okay, so that is the reason, that is the reason, if you are a practicing astrologer, a life of spiritual discipline is very, very much required. Okay, and as this is a channel for Vedic astrology, so if you are particularly lost or if you're going through a hard time, then at least Vedic astrology can provide you with the vision which is necessary to see all the obstacles that life is about to throw at you. Okay, so the wise people, they will not use Vedic astrology as a source of depression, but will use it as, to find out, or to, to ensure that lessons learned will aid in your spiritual growth. Okay, so anyways, that is it from my end in this video. So if you want a consultation regarding your chart, or if you want to discuss your chart, you're most welcome to do so at the number that is provided below in the description box. And I'll see you soon in another video. Namaste everyone. Om Gurave Namaha.